OSC, and while they were processing my complaints, I took this very seriously to evaluate the veterans for whether they had compensable mental disorders related to their service. And they pledged $60,000 over 2 years to institute a real-time veteran satisfaction survey. So I had the contract with the educational contract for iPads. I had logged in people to program valid questionnaires in it, and my intent was that while a veteran is waiting in the waiting area to be seen, would be able to complete this questionnaire using touch screens, which would be automatically compiled, and I would have information on whether a particular clinic or a particular healthcare professional I need to focus on. So this last bit was very concerning to the staff, and shortly after I made these disclosures, including 2 avoidable deaths that I wanted root cause analysis on, and an inpatient suicide attempt while the Joint Commission was reviewing our hospital, which was completely covered up. I did not go along with that. So very shortly, I was put on detail. I was told that there would be an administrative investigation, and that I was put to compensation and pension, doing compensation and pension evaluations. Now, I took this job also. It was dealing with veterans. I filed the complaint with OSC, and while they were processing my complaints, I took this very seriously to evaluate the veterans for whether they had compensable mental disorders related to their service. And what I found again here was that the veteran was not even heard properly. I had doubts whether the prior evaluation report was the same veteran or not. And this was a serious concern, so I actually started to look at their IDs again to make sure that this was not some other person. And the problem here was that the veteran did not have enough time to explain their situation. It was a hurried conveyor belt-like system where I was specifically told that I was spending too much time with the veteran, that I should hurry up and see the veteran and just check a few boxes in my evaluation, because it's meant for some rater somewhere to rate the disability. But that's not how I saw my job, and I think that's not the right way to do it. The three components need to be accomplished in these evaluations, because these are disability evaluations. You have to make sure that the veteran is heard properly, and the second thing is that I review the prior records properly to make sure that I capture a full history, and then the third is to make sure that my report reflects some of the inconsistencies in the record, and I speak to it so that the very next person, if it becomes an appeal issue, can determine how I made my decision. Now, there were few egregious errors that were there, and that really bothered me. And as I was detailed to the under primary care, so I wrote to the chief of primary care recently about these examples, about why this was really unfair to the veteran and how it affected the life of the veteran. And just 2 weeks ago, on the 26th of June, I'm detailed now to another place. So from my perspective, I have always put the veteran's interest first, and I have disclosed the wrongdoings that I found promptly to the chief of staff and to the chief of mental health, with the expectation that they would address it. And what I have found is that nothing has really changed. As late as June, just 2 weeks ago, the response to my finding about these evaluations that were not done properly was to just detail me elsewhere. So this seems to be an ongoing practice. When it's detailed, I don't have any responsibility as a chief of psychiatry. That's the position I accepted. The 2 people who I had really worked hard on recruiting, both excellent psychiatrists, one trained at Hopkins, the other at Harvard, they both declined to join the VA after I had to disclose that I'm no longer the chief. I've been removed. So there is a sense of mission that's lacking, and I'm really hoping that this committee, with its powers, will take aggressive actions to really make sure that this retaliation stops, and that the VA, the people responsible, are held accountable, because really, with the data being so so cooked up and so unbelievable. It's extremely important that, while we work on data integrity to make sure that the data reflects reality, it's extremely important that people step forward and are able to speak the truth and talk about what's really happening at the patient interaction level. And I think that I'm really hoping that this committee would do that. And I'm really honored that I have this opportunity to be able to answer questions and to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Matthews. We'll have an opportunity, each of us, to ask questions and get into specifics a little bit later on. Next, I'd like to recognize Dr. Head for 5 minutes.
Thank you for inviting me to testify today. I'm honored, Congressman, and I think it's a very important topic, our veterans, and we shouldn't lose focus of that. I'm Associate Director, Chief of Staff at the West Los Angeles VA Hospital. I'm very proud of my position, and I can't think of a better job than serving our veterans. But retaliation is alive and well across our country, especially within the VA administration. My first encounter was a number of years ago. I was subpoenaed by the Inspector General to investigate time card fraud involving 2 surgeons in my area. I was among close to 30 individuals who gave testimony. I gave honest and true testimony, and during that testimony I said I feared retaliation. And I outlined how I felt they would retaliate against me. Every aspect I outlined came true. The person who did the deposition was Inspector Solomon from the Inspector General's office, and she promised I would be protected both in the state and federal government. 3 months after they came out with the final results, one of the individuals paid back a year's salary to the federal government and resigned. Another individual, who they recommend immediate termination, was allowed to stay in her supervisory role. There was an end-of-the-year party because we're affiliated with a university that's nearby. At that party, this slide is shown. I know, that actually is me. I'm much younger back then, and I had hair. But you see I'm flipping the bird and it says, if all else fails, call 1-800-488-VAIG. In front of close to 300 individuals, I was labeled a rat. I was labeled the person who ratted out this person. The slide to follow this is so heinous that I can't even show or discuss it today. I could discuss it under subpoena. That person is, by the way, still in the supervisory role at the VA. No apology. Nothing. I somehow survived that. Retaliation has been relentless. The problem my retaliators have is that I think the VA and the veterans deserve far better. No matter what happens to me, I think the focus still should be on the veterans of this country. I somehow survived that process. And again, I was retaliated again later when I gave my opinion on the investigation of a physician who was wrongly terminated. I was asked to change my testimony. My salary I stopped getting paid for 2 weeks. And because of other factors, my house went into foreclosure. I didn't lose my house. But the harm it causes the family members of federal workers who are being retaliated against cannot be measured. I have 2 young girls who I would be proud if they decided to join the armed forces or even work for the VA. I think the VA has the potential to be one of the finest institutions in the world. We've seen certain aspects of the pharmacy cannot be matched. It's one of the best in the world, very efficient. There are many different things that are efficient within our system. But what we should ask ourselves, when someone came up with the idea of seeing a veteran in 14 days, that was actually sounded like a good idea, that veterans would be seen promptly. What we should be questioning is, if we made a mistake and somehow overloaded the system, how come people's names disappeared off lists? How come hundreds of thousands of veterans electronically no longer existed? That should be the question. Retaliation exists because there's a culture. This culture of retaliation, that's really the cancer to the Veteran Administration. Most physicians and nurses and people who work in the hospital are disgusted. Morale is extremely low. People come up to me all the time and say, did that happen here? People care. The physician, when I heard some of the testimony I heard from the Phoenix VA, it was gut-wrenching. I couldn't sleep. And I believe there's a lot of people within the VA system that feel the same way. But there exists a cancer within leadership. A few individuals that perpetuate this idea that we should be silent, that we shouldn't stand up and do the right thing, and be honest. Everyone makes mistakes. But when you make a mistake and you try to conceal it, that is really the question we should be asking. Who are these individuals who would alter data and hide the truth and prevent patient care? I've been receiving would alter data and hide the truth and prevent patient care. I've been receiving text messages all day from veterans saying, be careful, Dr. Head. We don't want to lose you as a surgeon. Be careful, something might happen to you. If you get labeled as a whistleblower, oh my God, they'll take you out. I'm not afraid to be taken out. I do hope if I am taken out, someone will take care of my family. But I think people need to speak up. And we shouldn't be isolated, ostracized. And the level of defamation, you notice that every time there's a whistleblower, there's usually an email that follows, well, this person's not getting a bonus and so they're upset, or this person didn't get the raise they wanted, so, they can be suspect, or this person didn't do this. They always defame. They defame, they isolate, usually they transfer you to another position. Why? Because they're slowly building a case, if they don't have one already, to say that you're crazy, that you're not being truthful. And I would hope, I apologize for running over, I would hope that I've given you close to 176 pages, 276 pages, I think, of evidence and a number of other statements of other individuals that would be helpful in trying to improve the system. I would hope, and especially the press, I will challenge you also to be a real reporter and actually report the truth. But also, I would, not to insult the reporters, and also the congressmen and women, this is very important that we try to focus on what's really important here, and that's the veterans of this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your courage, Dr. Head. Dr. Mitchell, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good evening. I'm deeply honored by the committee's invitation to testify tonight. As a Phoenix VA employee, I have suffered retaliation for years for routinely reporting health and safety concerns. My written testimony details some of that retaliation and the devastating effects on patient care. In addition, Section 4 and Section 5 of my written testimony outlines specific tactics that the VA uses to suppress whistleblowing and also to retaliate against anyone who speaks up within its ranks, even without whistleblowing. The VA, in my opinion, has routinely intimidated any employee who brings forth information that is contrary to the public image that the VA wishes to project. In 2013, I submitted a confidential OIG complaint regarding the life-threatening issues within the Phoenix VA system. Approximately 10 days after the National VA received my report, I was placed on administrative leave for a month. I was subsequently investigated for misconduct because I had provided limited amounts of patient information through the confidential OIG channel in order to support my allegations of the suicide trends and the facility's inappropriate response to them. Eventually, I would receive a written counseling stating that I violated a specific patient policy, but to this day, my Human Resource Department refuses to tell me the name of the policy I violated. This is relatively minor retaliation considering what happened during my last 3 years as medical director in the emergency department. During that time, we were grossly understaffed in terms of physicians and nurses. In addition, there was insufficient ancillary staffing to do basic items such as wash beds, answer telephones, deliver patients, transport labs. As a result, doctors and nurses were routinely pulled away from direct patient care in order to perform these extra duties. When the number of patient visits increased greatly to our ER, the deficiencies became obvious. The actual number of mistakes as well as near misses in our nursing triage skyrocketed. Symptoms such as stroke, heart attack, pneumonia, blood infections, and other serious medical issues were routinely missed by inexperienced triage nurses or by seasoned triage nurses who were simply overwhelmed by the flood of patients that were hitting our ER. I started reporting the cases of actual mistakes or near misses to the facility chain of command. In the process of reporting hundreds of these, approximately 20% of the ER nurses would retaliate against me. They would stop doing my orders for patients. They would refuse to answer questions in the nurses' station. They would not give me verbal reports on patients that were placed in rooms. Administration was made aware of this and yet declined to intervene to stop this behavior that was obviously interfering with my care for patients. In addition, they ignored my repeated requests for additional resources for our ER, and they would never institute the comprehensive, standardized nurse triage training that we needed in order to prevent future mistakes in care being made in our ER. This is not to say they were idle, however. They did ban me from reporting any cases to the risk management department. My proficiencies dropped each year that I worked. I was forced to work 2 years of unlimited scheduled shifts to fill in holes in the physician staffing because HR was too slow at credentialing emergency room physicians to fill in. Eventually, things reached a critical mass. When the new oncoming medical center director, Sharon Hellman, arrived, I told her that the ER was too dangerous on an hour-to-hour basis to remain open and we should be closed unless additional vitally needed support was given. Unfortunately, the administration's response was to haul me into a meeting within about a week and a half and tell me that the only problem in the ER was my lack of communication skills. The nursing backlash that was reported would never be investigated. Eventually, I was involuntarily transferred based on critical need to an empty medical clinic. I assumed the medical director position of a clinic that only houses a social work program, and that's where I remain today. I do very useful work, but it's certainly not what Iwo Jima, Chosin Reservoir, Tet Offensives and Counteroffensives, Desert Storm, Kosovo, Croatia, the Battle of Fallujah, and dismal years in Helmand Province. It is a bitter irony to me that I, as a physician, could not guarantee their health and safety within a VA facility in the middle of cosmopolitan Phoenix. The VA needs to embrace the core values that it advertises on its website. Administrators who place their own personal gain above the welfare of veterans need to face consequences for so doing. However, in the process, it's very important that employees of any pay grade who truly care about veterans and their welfare, and that they be protected. They were often placed in the unthinkable position of being forced to follow orders or else permanently lose their livelihoods and their ability to help any veteran in the future. Most importantly, the ability to positively influence the patient care and safety of any veteran should not be considered a Democratic or Republican stance, a pro-union or anti-union choice, or even a uniquely American problem. The ability to freely advocate for the health and safety of any patient is a human issue, and it has ethical implications for all of us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Mr. Davis, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank the committee for providing a platform so that the voices of VA whistleblowers can be heard. I urge the committee to take prompt action as time is running out. Every day, a window of opportunity closes on a veteran to receive quality health care because of the inaction of senior VA officials. Some veterans even face the burden of being billed for care their service has earned them. As noted in the Office of Special Counsel report, VA leadership has repeatedly failed to respond to the concerns raised by whistleblowers about patient care at VA. Despite the best efforts of truly committed employees at the HEC and the Veteran Health Administration, who have risked their careers to stand up for veterans, management at all levels have ignored them or retaliated against them for simply exposing the truth. Some of the critical issues reported to senior VA officials by whistleblowers at the HEC include mismanaging critical veteran health programs and wasting millions of dollars on an Affordable Care Act direct mail campaign. The possible purging and deletion of over 10,000 veteran health records at the Health Eligibility Center. A backlog of over 600,000 pending health applications. Nearly 40,000 unprocessed applications discovered in January of 2013. These were primarily applications from returning service members from Iraq and Afghanistan. The harassment I've experienced at the HEC from top levels of management include my whistleblower complaint to White House Deputy Chief of Staff Rob Neighbors was leaked to my manager, Sherry Williams, who stated in writing that she was contacting me on behalf of Acting Secretary Gibson and Mr. Rob Neighbors. Neither Mr. Gibson nor Mr. Neighbors have responded to this fact. My employment records were illegally altered by CBO Workforce Management Director Joyce Dieters. I was illegally placed on a permanent work detail by Assistant Deputy Undersecretary Philip Matkovsky and Acting Chief Business Officer Stephanie Martin. I was placed on involuntary administrative leave, curiously at the same time the OIG investigation was taking place in Atlanta by Acting HEC Director Greg Becker. Unfortunately, my experience is not unique at VA. Darren and Eileen Owens, who work at the Atlanta VA Medical Center, have experienced the same retaliation for reporting medical errors and patient neglect, as well as misconduct by senior VA police officials. Our Local 518 Union President, Daphne Ivory, is routinely harassed as a direct consequence of assisting me and other disabled federal employees with retaliatory action by members of management. Mr. Owens, Mrs. Owens, Miss Ivory are all veterans. In fact, over 50% of the staff that works at the HEC are disabled veterans. In 2010, allegations surfaced that applications for VA healthcare were being shredded at the HEC under the direction of the HEC Director and Deputy Director, Ms. Kimberly Hughes, former Associate Director for Informatics, and her team began to investigate this allegation. Her team discovered nearly 2,000 applications that were reported as being processed that did not appear as new enrollments in the enrollment system. Ms. Hughes' investigation was abruptly closed by the HEC Director's office. She was also subjected to harassment and intimidation because she dared to advocate for veterans. The whistleblower statements I have provided to the committee were also provided to the OIG and are more relevant to the committee than many may realize. I urge additional review of those whistleblower statements. In addition to providing specific examples of whistleblower harassment to the committee, I hope my testimony provides some insight to 3 key issues VA management fails to address: reckless waste of federal funds and causing greater backlog of enrollment applications for the sole purpose of achieving performance goals; why there is resistance to implementing proper and effective processing and reporting systems, and the source of the resistance as addressed previously by Dr. Draper during her testimony, and the need to remove ineffective managers, and the critical need for the VA Management Accountability Act to be fully implemented. Thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davis. If you would explain a little bit further the information you provided to Rob Neighbors, who was detailed from the White House over to VA that led to adverse employment actions being taken against you.
Yes, I contacted Mr. Neighbors about 4 weeks ago. As the point of contact for the White House, I wanted him to be aware of what was going on in our office. A lot of attention has been placed on scheduling, but it's important to understand if you're not enrolled, you're not going to be placed on the schedule. I wanted him to know about shortcomings with the enrollment system, a system that many of you have talked about. We have spent millions of dollars on, and yet we're still back at square one with these VA systems. I also reached out to him about a Medicare Part D marketing initiative by VA to encourage senior citizens who are veterans to drop their subsequent companion Medicare insurance and enroll in VA. That was problematic because as you know, if you enroll in VA, you can only use the pharmacy at VA. You have to use your VA doctor. Many of our most vulnerable veterans were not aware of that and could be confused and cancel their supplemental Medicare insurance and end up being stuck in the donut hole in the backlog. I also contacted Mr. Neighbors about the continued mismanagement of VA health programs managed by the HEC and the Chief Business Office under the direction of Mr. Philip Makovsky and Lynn Harbin. After sending that information to Mr. Neighbors, I did not receive a response. I subsequently contacted the Office of Deputy Chief of Staff Anita Breckenridge. I also did not receive a response until after receiving notification from Ms. Sherry Williams that she was contacting me on behalf of the acting secretary and Mr. Rob Neighbors. This surprised me that Ms. Williams would do this because she is a former OIG official. To this date, no action has been taken to reprimand Ms. Williams for her behavior. This goes to the very heart of the question whether or not VA should be allowed to police itself and whether or not an outside agency should be brought in to fully conduct an investigation to the actions taken at VA. The last thing I will say is I did receive an email from the White House Office of White House Counsel directing me to contact the Office of Special Counsel. Well, if that was the official position from the White House, there would have been no need for anyone to contact Ms. Williams about my complaint.
You also, in your testimony, you described the possible purging of over 10,000 veteran health records at the Health Eligibility Center. There's a backlog of 600,000 pending benefit applications and 40,000 unprocessed applications discovered that span 3 years.
Absolutely. Currently, we have over 600,000 pending applications. These are applications that have been applied for by a veteran, turned into VA, and for whatever reason, we could not take that application to a final determination. This backlog has reached, again, the number of 600,000. What we should have done, instead of hiring 40 people to address the Affordable Care Act in a belief that we're going to have this surge of people because of a buddy letter marketing campaign where the veteran was encouraged to pass on information about enrolling into VA healthcare to a fellow veteran. Well, unfortunately, the information for the veteran to take the action was on the second page of the letter. Therefore, we ended up getting 80,000 duplicate applications, of which only about 1,650 were actually applications that we could actually do something with. In terms of the 40,000, this was discovered in January of 2013. And this is important to the committee because I want to share something that was in a report that I forwarded to the committee from 2013. Increasing online application submissions versus paper and improving turnaround times for eligibility decisions has a positive direct impact on providing timely access to healthcare. Data reveals applications submitted in person are processed with higher urgency while online applications linger in a less visible queue. To answer your question, how could this happen? Because these applications linger in a less visible queue. Even though the IT department had paid licensing fees for over $40,000 for us to have a new system for managing the queue, a system referred to as BizFlow. That system was only put into play for implementation until after the 40,000 applications that were lingering in the queue for some cases for nearly 3 years was discovered. That is something that is shameful.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Members, I have one more question I'd like to ask Dr. Head. Dr. Head, you talked about the retaliation against you, and I want to specifically talk about Dr. Wang, who I read that the OIG concluded that Dr. Wang had in fact committed time card fraud. Is that correct?
Yes, the official report was not released to the layperson. The information I received was that they had recommended immediate termination of her and this other individual. Through other chief of staff and counsel, they had said that they had found significant fraud, time card fraud.
And so she's been terminated.
She has not been terminated. She has been maintained in a supervisory role.
Can you explain a little bit about how that has occurred?
I have no idea how she was able to maintain her position.
But VA did not follow the Inspector General's recommendations.
They elected not to follow the Inspector General's recommendation. She has been left in her division chief position. She was my supervisor. I filed a complaint, numerous complaints. They moved me from that office under her chain of command to the chief of staff, which, in my opinion, was an excellent opportunity. I rose in the ranks, became head of legal and quality assurance, and I've become, I think, an expert in system analysis and quality assurance, which I think will help the veteran even more, ironically now, from being retaliated against. But that's just how I was brought up, to find a way.
Thank you, Doctor. Mr. Michaud.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As you all know, whistleblowers are, you often risk your career in order to bring problems to light. What would you recommend that we do as far as to change the rules or laws government-wide to actually help protect the whistleblowers? And I'll start with Dr. Matthews and work down if there's anything that we should do to strengthen the Whistleblower Protection Act.
Yes, that's an excellent question, and one of the things that I experienced was that I was immediately removed from my position. So, under the guise of an administrative investigation, with the specific directive to not contact any of the psychiatrists that I was managing, and they cut off my access to the databases, some of which I'd set up myself to get accurate data. So one of the things could be that if there is this sort of an investigation that the person continues rather than be detailed, and if the person has to be detailed, perhaps there should be a review by peers to see whether that's even warranted or not. There seems to be no time limit to these kinds of detail, and this is the second time I've been detailed. Just recently, I've been detailed again. So as Dr. Mitchell mentioned, these are not the jobs that we want. So having that protection, having the OSC have some sort of a time limit to review these complaints would be very beneficial. Having a process for like you rightly mentioned, if a supervisor is indeed found to have retaliated, to have some very tangible consequences to that person would be very, very important. Right now, I think, at least in the St. Louis VA, they do not think that this is a serious issue. Like I said, like 2 weeks ago, I was called into a meeting with the chief of staff where the chief of the outpatient psychiatry, the person I'd worked with very closely to implement my changes, was also called into that meeting. And in that meeting, I was specifically told that the chain of command must be respected at all times, that if I had any issue, or if Dr. Isis had any issue, that we should report it first to our supervisor and then move up the next level and the next level. So I called the chief.
Could you finish up, because I'm running out of time?
Oh, yes,
there
yes.
are three others. So
yes. So so I think your recommendation for having very quick and serious consequences to retaliation would be very important.
Thank you, Dr. Head.
Yes. I think there needs to be greater repercussions for retaliation. We have laws referred to as shield laws and sword laws. Sword laws meaning that if I retaliate against someone, there are federal laws that says, look, retaliation is against the law. And they can warn the person, don't retaliate, but they can continue to retaliate against the person. which ultimately will have a direct or indirect effect on the care of the veteran, endangering a veteran only because their caregiver or doctor or nurse is being retaliated against. Shield law means that not only do you have a sword law of repercussions for retaliation, but you have a shield law where you can immediately take action, and there can be immediate repercussions for any type of retaliation against a whistleblower. In other words, you tell the chief of staff, you say, look, if this person gets retaliated against, pushed out of the job or anything, we're going to hold you accountable for this until we figure out what's going on here. And we have a shield law that was enacted in the state of California, but that's something that should be considered by Congress. So ultimately, you will address it one way or another, because retaliation in the health place is different than a factory. Because you retaliate against a physician or surgeon or nurse practitioner or nurse, you're going to have direct repercussions one way or another to the health and well-being of a veteran.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell.
I'm not sure all of it. I'm not sure all of it needs to be legislated, but certainly the OIG needs to put in writing that providing limited patient information to support allegations in a complaint is not a violation of HIPAA. It isn't, but certainly there are employees charged all over the nation for it. In addition, sham peer reviews need to be part of the prohibited personnel actions. That's where they drum up a reason to examine a physician's cases. They have a predetermination that this physician is not properly functioning, even though there certainly is no problem with this level of functioning. And then they can permanently sabotage a physician's ability to get employed not only inside the VA, but in the private sector. Whenever you're subjected to a peer review, you have to report being a subject of a peer review for the rest of your professional life, on every job application, on every license renewal. Sham peer reviews are done specifically to sabotage the credibility of a physician. Physicians truly face losing their livelihood, their ability to be employed again as a physician. You need whistleblowers that are physicians, people that are trained to identify the high-risk problems.
Dr. Davis?
Yes, thank you. I don't know if a new law would really change anything, honestly, at VA if you don't have accountability. I think there's some structural changes that need to take place. One being a centralized human resource office that actually has operational authority. Currently, when I went through my situation of retaliation, I spoke with the representative from the VA HR office. They told me they're only a policy body, that they could contact the HR office where I work and maybe make some recommendations and see what they could negotiate. That's problematic because in VA, unlike a corporation or a normal healthcare system, every division or the hospital itself has its own HR department, which becomes the secret police force for the managers who harass employees. And that's problematic, and that's what needs to change. So I think an operational change for a centralized human resource office would also help. But also I think you need to start making bad managers pay their own legal fees. Currently, managers who engage in harassment have no fear because the bill is going to be passed on to the taxpayer. And even if they lose a case or they find guilty of wrongdoing, well, the bill just goes on to the taxpayer. Currently, we have managers in our office that have several different complaints for harassment. It's not a big deal to them. Regional counsel will take care of it. The Office of General Counsel will take care of it. So I think that's the issue that really would change people's behavior if you hit them in their pocket.
Mr. Lamborn, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing. And I want to thank all of you for being here. You're showing a lot of bravery and courage. You're putting it all out on the line to do this. And I know that you're doing it for our veterans. Dr. Mitchell, I'd like to ask you, you've been at the Phoenix VA for 16 years. Do you believe that the lack of response to safety issues that you've brought up over the years have threatened the health and even the life of veterans in Phoenix?
Yes, anything that impairs the efficiency or the delivery of care threatens the lives of patients. Certainly in the ER, I can recall at least 3 specific deaths, and several more, I believe, actually occurred in the ER. As a resident, when I also trained through the Phoenix VA, there were at least 2 patients I know that died because they were delayed in getting their cardiac cath, because the VA only did cardiac catheterizations Monday through Friday, not on weekends. These veterans had to wait because there wasn't time to get them done on Friday, so they died on Sunday. When I was a nurse there, there were tremendous problems with patient care, and there weren't sufficient nurses to turn patients in the adequate number of time. We had patients developing huge bed sores. I can remember JACO certification inspections that to this day still haunt me, because administration would authorize overtime for charting because the JACO administrator would look at charting, but would not authorize overtime for nursing staff to turn patients because there wasn't enough staff to do it, or to feed patients. We used to volunteer our time quite a bit because we couldn't leave the team short-staffed.
Doctor, did these problems catch the hospital and the administrators by surprise, or had they been warned that there were pending problems if something didn't change?
I'm aware of problems throughout the facility without necessarily having access to upper administration. I know that people communicate these concerns as best they can. What happens is any concern you bring up, you have to present to your supervisor in a politically correct manner, because if you don't, you will be retaliated against. Either you'll be harassed at the moment you're giving the information, your proficiencies will drop, something bad will occur. It's best that management not know your name, because if they do, it makes you an automatic target. And I'm sorry, that's not to say that all supervisors are that way. There's some incredibly ethical supervisors at the facility where I work with.
Okay, good, and that's that's good to hear. The interim OIG report, which brought out some of the issues that we're seeing even better as a result, you believe didn't go far enough, if I understand your testimony correctly. Do you think that there were flaws with the methodology, and that it could have even been more revealing of problems out there?
Yeah, there's a saying that has to do with lies, damn lies, and statistics. And what they did was they took out a segment of patients and said, well, this is the average wait time. The NAIR list that they were looking at was divided by clinic. Some of the clinics had relatively short waiting time. The NAIR list ran from, I believe, January of 2013 to April 24th of 2014. Some clinics had very short waiting times. The downtown Phoenix clinics were all aggregated, or an aggregate sum, and the waiting time started at 477. They didn't hit down to the 110s, 120s until page 8 or page 9. Because some of the wait times were 0 or 1 day or 2 days, because it extended up until April 24th, I have no idea which patients they picked. It would have been certainly more accurate to say at the Phoenix VA clinics, we had this many patients waiting 0 to 30 days, this many from 31 to 45.
So as a result, and we're getting to real detail here, you don't think that the report revealed nearly as much of the problems as it could have?
No, I told them about the mental health waiting delays, the huge problems with that. Other people told them that issues. I told them about the patient safety issues. It certainly didn't go into that.
Okay, thank you. Once again, I want to thank you all for your service to our veterans and for being here today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Takano. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Matthews, are you familiar with the federal classification of employees, whether it's SES or Title 38 employees? Are you aware of that?
Yes.
In your capacity as chief of psychiatry, was that a Title 38 position? Do you know?
Yes, it's a Title 38 position.
Okay, Dr. Head, in your position where you formerly were, was that a Title 38 position, or was that or something below Title 38?
Title 38. I'm still employed by the...
You're still employed, I understand. Okay, and Dr. Mitchell?
Yes, I'm a Title 38 employee, and I've been employed as a physician throughout my VA career there.
Okay, and Dr. Davis? Mr. Davis?
No, I'm just a general service employee.
General service employee. So one of the things I'm grappling with is the proposal for us to make it easier to fire VA employees guilty of wrongdoing, at a more at-will sort of basis, and that would apply to the senior executive service. And typically whistleblowers come from the lower ranks of employment, but there's a debate about whether or not we should extend this sort of standard to Title 38 employees. And so in my mind, I'm going through this contradiction of, there is a sense among some members that we want to make it easier to fire people at certain levels of service, but that might seem to run against the idea that we need to also protect people who speak up. Dr. Matthews, do you have any thoughts on this? I mean, we have a whistleblower protection, but I mean, how do you feel about it making it easier for us to fire Title 38 employees?
Well, I think, when veterans' life and health is at issue here, I think that, you should be able to be fired. Any person in direct patient care right now enjoys almost a lifetime tenure where they're completely protected from their actions, the consequences of their actions. And I think that is not good for providing a safe work environment for the veterans, or a safe health environment for the veterans, or a work environment for the physicians and other people who come forward. I do not think that the chief of staff or the chief of mental health, who just threatened me 2 weeks ago, has any concern about their position being threatened in any manner. So I think that kind of protection should end. At the same time, I also would want us to consider that a workplace is only as good as the employees there, and I'm hoping that we take a look at what the salary structure is, especially for some hard-to-fill positions, so that we can have less protection.
Dr. Mathis, excuse me. But wouldn't that ability to have fired you so absolutely have eliminated your ability to even voice any dissent or act as a whistleblower?
Well, that already exists. I mean, they already professionally assassinated me, in the sense that, I'm no longer the chief of psychiatry. They've already spread this, the fact that I'm no longer the chief of psychiatry. In fact, the way I found out that there was this administrative investigation stuff going on is when one of the psychiatrists I recruited called me concerned that, are you fired? I mean, I hear that you're fired. So professionally, and it's a bad statement on the VA that, me having trouble with the VA is... would you have been better off, worse off having you completely eliminated, your voice completely eliminated by you being summarily fired because they had the ability to do so? You at least are able to be here and voice your concerns there. And actually, there was a change. I mean, it's far from where we need to be in order to have feedback from people at the mid-level and lower levels to be able to say what's wrong. That's our interest, right? I think in our national interest to be able to have lower-level employees, mid-level employees be able to speak up without fear of being retaliated. But is whistleblower protection enough? Do we need to have some sense of due process, which some members would like to see eliminated, so that it's easier to fire people? I see a tension here. I mean, I think you might even recognize. I too would like to be able to fire people, not have them have complete tenure, and they feel insulated. Right.
But I don't know how we solve this.
Well, I think one way that I can suggest is to put ourselves or our loved one in the veteran position. Would I want to obtain care, or would I want my son to obtain care at a system where poorly performing nurses or physicians cannot be fired? And I would not want to go to that hospital. So I think that would help perhaps resolve this tension about who are we protecting. Are we protecting the veterans, or are we protecting the VA employees?
I understand. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. And also the legislation that we have passed in the House does not reach down to this level of a SES or Title 38 employee, only senior level, the top 450. Mr. Milarakis, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thanks for holding this hearing. And I want to thank you, the people that are testifying tonight, for putting the veteran first. Thank you so much for your courage. I really appreciate it. Dr. Head, I know I don't have a lot of time. You mentioned in your testimony that this potentially could be the VA system, VHA, could be the best healthcare system in the world. How do we get there?
I believe with leadership. There are certain people in leadership that have been there for 18, 20 years. And if they're a great leader, it's fabulous. But if they're not, it's very disruptive to the system. We need to find ways to bring in leadership on a continuing basis. Maybe I don't know if this is the answer, maybe term limits. And if you're a good leader, you're identified as a good leader, and perhaps you can be part of the team that brings on new leadership and show them the right direction. And if you're not such a good leader, maybe you should be integrated in another part of the federal government or retire. But leadership is clearly the key. Our surgical team at the West LA VA can be matched against any surgical team in the country, possibly in the world. We have my wife, much smarter than I am, is an interventional electrophysiologist, cardiologist at the VA. She could work anywhere in the country. Somehow she agreed to marry me and also dedicate her life to serving veterans. She loves her job. She obsesses over it. She's always worried about trying to save another veteran, and I commend that. And there's lots of people like that within our system. We need leadership.